She never knew the Alpha King would choose her.
A crystal glass shattered against the ballroom floor, but no one moved to clean it up. 300 of the country's most powerful shifters held their breath, their eyes darting between the woman in the diamond-encrusted gown and the girl standing in the shadows behind her, holding a velvet coat. Everyone expected a coronation. Everyone expected the union of two dynasties. But when Declan Mercer, the Alpha King of the Pacific Coast, walked past the perfect candidate to grab the wrist of the invisible sister, the silence broke. This wasn't just a romance. It was a declaration of war against the oldest families in the state. This is the story of Clara Evans. The morning of the coronation did not begin with fanfare for Clara Evans. It began with the sharp hiss of a steamer and the smell of burnt silk. "You're doing it wrong, Clara." "God, do you want me to look like a beggar?" Beatrice Evans stood on a podium in the center of the master's suite, her arms outstretched like a sacrificial idol. She was objectively stunning blonde hair that fell in perfectly engineered waves, eyes the color of polished sea glass, and a figure that the Evans family had spent a small fortune maintaining with personal trainers and private chefs. Clara lowered the industrial steamer, wiping sweat from her forehead. "The fabric is delicate, B. If I get too close, it melts. If you don't get the wrinkles out, Dad loses the contract," Beatrice snapped, turning to look at herself in the trifold mirror. "Declan Mercer doesn't mate with wrinkled women." Clara said nothing. She simply adjusted the nozzle and went back to work. This was the dynamic of the Evans household. Beatrice was the asset, the crown jewel, the future queen of the Mercer pack. Clara was the logistics manager, the emotional support animal, and the invisible hand that kept the family's crumbling reputation intact. Their father, Richard Evans, walked into the room while adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't look at Clara. His eyes went straight to Beatrice. "The car is downstairs," Richard said, his voice tight with the specific anxiety of a man who owes too much money to dangerous people. "We're on a schedule. Beatrice, remember what we practiced. Chin up, expose the neck slightly, but don't look desperate." "Mercer is an Alpha Prime. He smells desperation like rot." "I know, Daddy," Beatrice cooed, her demeanor shifting instantly from shrew to princess. "I'm ready. I've been ready since I was 12. Clara finished the hem of the dress, a custom Vera Wang that cost more than Clara's entire college tuition would have, had she been allowed to go. She stepped back, blending into the beige wallpaper. "Clara," Richard said, finally acknowledging his younger daughter, "you're driving the support vehicle with the luggage and the emergency medical kit. Stay 5 car lengths behind the limo. We don't want the Mercer security team thinking we're bringing an entourage." "Yes, Dad," Clara said, "and change into something presentable," he added, glancing distastefully at her grey sweatpants. "You'll be in the servants' hall during the ceremony, but people talk." As they swept out of the room, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and high expectations, Clara let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a decade. She walked to the mirror where her sister had just stood. Clara was not ugly. She knew that. She had dark hair like their late mother, and eyes that were a muddy hazel rather than brilliant blue. But in a world governed by wolf hierarchy, she was a latent, a wolf with no shift, no scent, and no status. To the Evans family, she was useful only because she was invisible. She changed into a simple navy dress she had bought at a thrift store in downtown Seattle. It fit her well, hugging a waist that Beatrice constantly criticized. She pulled her hair into a severe bun, grabbed the keys to the beat-up SUV, and headed downstairs. The drive to the Mercer estate took 2 hours. It was located deep in the Olympic Peninsula, surrounded by ancient pines and a heavy, constant mist. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. The Mercer pack controlled the entire shipping industry on the West Coast. Declan Mercer wasn't just an alpha, he was a kingpin who happened to have claws. Clara gripped the steering wheel as the iron gates loomed. She watched the black limousine ahead of her glide through. When she pulled up, the guard stopped her. "Name?" the guard asked, leaning out of the booth. He looked like he chewed rocks for breakfast. "Clara Evans. I'm with the potential mate." The guard checked a clipboard. He frowned. "You aren't on the guest list. I'm staff," Clara lied smoothly. It was easier than explaining she was the sister of the future queen, wardrobe, and medical. He waved her through toward the service entrance. While Beatrice and Richard were likely being greeted with champagne and caviar at the front portico, Clara parked next to a dumpster and hauled 3 suitcases of Beatrice's emergency outfits across the wet gravel. She entered the kitchen, the heat hitting her face. It was chaotic. Caterers were shouting. Trays of venison tartare were flying by. "You! Grab this!" a head chef shouted, shoving a silver tray of champagne flutes into Clara's hands. "I'm not. I don't care who you are. We are down 3 servers and the Alpha King just entered the hall." "Move." Clara hesitated. She could drop the tray and hide in the car. But curiosity, a dangerous thing for a latent, pricked at her. She wanted to see him. She wanted to see the man who terrified her father. She wanted to see the man who was about to inherit her sister. She adjusted her grip on the tray, smoothed her navy dress, and walked toward the double doors leading to the grand ballroom. The grand ballroom of the Mercer estate was a cavern of stone and glass. A chandelier the size of a small car hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting fractured light over the crowd. Clara stood near a pillar in the back, gripping the champagne tray so hard her knuckles turned white. The room was thick with pheromones. To a human, it would just smell like musk and expensive cologne. To a wolf, even a latent one like Clara, it smelled like power. At the center of the room stood her father and Beatrice. Beatrice was glowing. She was chatting with the beta of the pack, laughing at the right moments, tilting her head to bare her throat just enough. She was playing the game perfectly. Then, the room went dead silent. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall opened. Declan Mercer walked in. He was nothing like the magazines. The tabloids painted him as a suave, corporate shark in an Armani suit. The man walking into the room looked like a brawler who had been forced into a tuxedo. He was tall, over 6'4", with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his jacket. His hair was black, kept slightly too long, and he had a scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his energy that terrified Clara. It rolled off him in waves, cold, dark, and predatory. He didn't look like a man looking for a wife. He looked like an executioner looking for a neck. "Alpha Mercer," Richard Evans said, stepping forward and bowing low. "It is an honor." Declan didn't look at Richard. His eyes, dark as oil, swept the room. He looked bored. "Richard, you're late." "Traffic, Alpha. My apologies. May I present my daughter, Beatrice Evans?" Richard stepped aside, revealing Beatrice. She dropped into a perfect curtsy, her blue eyes shimmering. "Alpha Mercer, I have heard so much about your leadership." Declan walked toward her. The crowd leaned in. This was it, the moment of the claim. The Evans family needed this bond to solidify their debts. Beatrice needed it to validate her existence. Declan stopped 2 feet from Beatrice. He inhaled deeply. Beatrice smiled, waiting for the spark, the widening of the eyes, the declaration of mate. Declan frowned. He leaned in closer, sniffing near her neck. Beatrice shivered, but Clara, watching from the shadows, saw the Alpha's lip curl. It wasn't desire, it was distaste. "Vanilla," Declan said, his voice a low rumble that carried to the back of the room. "And fear. I am just overwhelmed by your presence, Alpha," Beatrice stammered, her smile faltering. "You smell like a lie," Declan said. The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the space. Richard Evans turned pale grey. "Alpha, I assure you, she is of pure bloodlines." "I don't care about her blood," Declan snapped. He turned his back on Beatrice. "She is not the one I was promised." Clara, sensing the impending explosion, turned to flee. She needed to get back to the kitchen before the violence started. She pivoted on her heel, but in her haste, her hip checked the stone pillar. The champagne flutes on her tray rattled. One tipped over. Clink. It wasn't loud, but in the tomb-like silence of the ballroom, it sounded like a gunshot. Declan whipped his head around. His eyes bypassed the shocked guests, bypassed the trembling Beatrice, and locked onto the shadows near the service entrance. He locked onto Clara. Clara froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Don't look at him," she thought. "Latents are invisible. Just look down." But she couldn't. His gaze was physical. It hooked into her chest and pulled. Declan didn't walk toward her. He stalked. The crowd parted like water, terrified of getting in his way. Beatrice stood frozen in the center of the room, her mouth open, watching the king walk away from her. Clara backed up until her spine hit the wall. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the tray trembling in her hands. "I'm just the help. I'll leave." Declan stopped inches from her. Up close, He was terrifying. She could smell him: rain, pine, and something metallic, like hot copper. It was overwhelming. It made her knees weak, not out of fear, but out of something else, something ancient. He reached out a hand. His fingers were rough, calloused. He took the silver tray from her shaking hands and effortlessly tossed it onto a nearby table, shattering the rest of the glasses. He didn't care. "Look at me," he commanded. Clara looked up. Declan inhaled. His eyes, previously a flat, cold black, suddenly flared with gold. His pupils dilated until the gold was just a thin ring of fire. "You," he breathed. "I'm Clara," she managed to squeak out. "Beatrice's sister." "Sister?" Declan repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. He reached out and touched her jaw. His thumb grazed her pulse point. A shock of static electricity, painful and hot, snapped between them. Clara gasped. Declan growled, a sound that vibrated deep in his chest. "No," Declan said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. He turned to Richard Evans, who looked like he was having a stroke. "You brought me a show pony, Richard." Declan turned back to Clara, his hand sliding down to grip her wrist. It was possessive, unyielding. "But you left the Queen in the servants' quarters." "Alpha!" Beatrice shrieked, her composure shattering. "She's a latent. She's defective. She can't even shift." Declan looked at Beatrice over his shoulder. His expression was one of pure ice. "She is not defective," he said. "She is mine." He tugged Clara's wrist. "Come." "Where?" Clara asked, panic finally setting in. "Home," Declan said. And before Clara could protest, before Richard could object, and before Beatrice could scream again, Declan Mercer pulled Clara Evans out of the ballroom, leaving the shattered glass and the shattered dynasty of the Evans family behind them. The moment the heavy doors of the armored SUV slammed shut, the noise of the outside world vanished. The screaming of Beatrice, the frantic shouts of her father, the murmur of the crowd, it was all cut off, replaced by the hum of an engine and the overwhelming scent of cedar and rain. Clara sat pressed against the leather door, as far away from Declan Mercer as the confined space would allow. Her heart was beating so hard she felt nauseous. She looked at him. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his large hands resting on his knees. The gold in his eyes had faded back to that deep, impenetrable black, but the energy in the car was suffocating. "You made a mistake," Clara whispered. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. Declan didn't blink. "I don't make mistakes. I am a latent," she insisted, her voice gaining a little more traction. "I have no wolf. I can't produce an heir for you. I can't run with the pack. My father brought Beatrice because she is the genetic match. If you take me, you insult the Evans family, and you end up with a defective mate." Declan finally turned his head. The movement was slow, predatory. He looked at her not with anger, but with a strange curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Is that what they told you?" he asked quietly. "That you're defective?" "It's a medical fact," Clara said, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself. "I was tested at 12. No shift, no pheromones, nothing." Declan let out a short, dark laugh. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a silver cigarette case. He didn't light one. He just turned it over in his fingers. "Medical facts can be bought, Clara, especially by men like Richard Evans who need a servant more than they need a second daughter." Clara frowned. "What are you talking about? You don't smell like a latent," Declan said, his gaze dropping to her neck. "Latents smell like humans, dull, flat. You," he inhaled sharply, "you smell like a storm waiting to break." It was faint in the ballroom, buried under the scent of that cheap detergent you use. But it's there. He leaned forward, and Clara shrank back, but there was nowhere to go. He placed a hand on the seat beside her head, boxing her in. "Why were you hiding in the shadows?" "I wasn't hiding," Clara defended herself. "I was working. Someone has to make sure Beatrice looks perfect." "Beatrice?" Declan spat the name like a curse. "Your sister smells like ambition and vanilla perfume. She has no soul. If I had bitten her tonight, I would have torn her throat out within a week, out of sheer boredom." The car slowed down, turning onto a private road that wound up the cliffs overlooking the estate. Clara looked out the tinted window. They were heading toward the darker, more secluded wing of the Mercer territory, the Alpha's personal residence. It was a brutalist structure of concrete and glass hanging over the crashing Pacific Ocean. "Where are we going?" "My home," Declan said. "Your home." "I can't stay here," Clara said, panic rising again. "My father. He has debts. Beatrice was the payment. If the deal falls through—" "The deal hasn't fallen through," Declan interrupted. "I'm taking an Evans girl. The contract didn't specify which one." The car stopped. The driver, a hulking man named Silas who served as Declan's beta, opened the door. The wind from the ocean whipped Clara's hair across her face as she stepped out. The house was massive, intimidating, and cold. Declan walked up the steps, expecting her to follow. When she hesitated, he stopped and looked back. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her name gently. "You are not a prisoner, but you are not leaving. Not until I figure out why a wolf as powerful as yours has been sleeping for 10 years. "I told you, I don't have a wolf," she cried out, frustration bubbling over. "We'll see," Declan said. "Dr. Aris is coming in the morning." Meanwhile, back at the Mercer Estate ballroom, the scene was one of absolute carnage, socially speaking. The guests had been ushered out, whispering furiously into their phones. The humiliation of the Evans family was already trending on social media. Beatrice sat on a velvet chair in the empty hall, a glass of whiskey in her hand, her third. Her mascara was running, staining her perfect cheeks. Richard was pacing frantically, talking on his cell phone. "Yes, I know. I know the contract said firstborn, but he chose the spare. What do you want me to do? Shoot him?" Richard yelled into the phone, then slammed it down. "He humiliated me," Beatrice hissed, staring at the wall. "He looked at me like I was garbage, and he took her. The maid. He took her because he thinks he's clever," Richard muttered, running a hand through his thinning hair. "He thinks he found a diamond in the rough. He doesn't know." Beatrice looked up, her eyes narrowing. "Doesn't know what?" Richard stopped pacing. He looked at his remaining daughter, his face pale. "He doesn't know why Clara is a latent. He doesn't know what we did to her." Beatrice's expression shifted from self-pity to cold calculation. She stood up, smoothing her dress. "If he finds out, Daddy, he won't just cancel the debt. He'll kill us. The Mercer pack laws are strict about harming pups. If he finds out we tampered with her connection." "He won't find out," Richard snapped, though he sounded unconvinced. "We need to get her back, or we need to make sure she never talks." "How?" "I have a contact inside the Mercer household," Richard said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A maid who owes me a favor. We need to send a message to Clara. We need to remind her who she belongs to." Beatrice smiled, a cruel, sharp thing. "Tell the maid to put something in her tea, just enough to make her sick, just enough to make Declan realize she's weak. He hates weakness. He'll throw her back to us within a day." The guest suite Declan had given Clara was larger than the entire ground floor of her father's house. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grey ocean, a king-sized bed with sheets that felt like spun clouds, and a bathroom stocked with products that cost more than her car. But Clara hadn't slept. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her navy dress, watching the sun rise over the water. She felt like an imposter. Any moment now, security would burst in, laugh at the mistake, and drag her back to her father's basement to steam Beatrice's dresses. A knock at the door made her jump. "Enter," she croaked. The door opened, and Declan walked in. He had changed out of his tuxedo into dark jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He looked less like a king and more like a soldier. Behind him walked a woman in a white lab coat, carrying a silver medical case. She was older, with silver hair tied in a strict bun and kind eyes. "Good morning," Declan said. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the nightstand next to Clara. "Drink. You look like a ghost." "I didn't sleep," Clara admitted. "This is Dr. Aris," Declan gestured to the woman. "She's the pack healer. She's the best in the state." "Hello, Clara," Dr. Aris said, setting her case on the desk. "Declan tells me you identify as a latent." "I don't identify as one," Clara said, feeling defensive. "I am one. Humor me," Dr. Aris said, snapping on latex gloves. "I need to take a blood sample and check your enzymatic levels." Clara sighed but extended her arm. She was used to doctors. Her father had sent her to dozens when she was 12, hoping to fix her before realizing she was a lost cause. Declan stood by the window, watching. He didn't look away, not even for a second. His presence was heavy, a constant pressure against Clara's senses. Dr. Aris tied the tourniquet and slid the needle in. Clara didn't flinch. The doctor filled 3 vials with dark red blood. Then, she pulled out a small, handheld device, a high-tech analyzer used by top-tier packs. She slotted the first vial in. The machine whirred and beeped. Dr. Aris frowned. She tapped the screen. "That's odd." "What?" Declan asked, stepping closer. "Her white blood cell count is normal, Doctor," Aris muttered. "But her lycanthropy markers, they aren't 0. A true latent has 0 markers. Clara has high markers. So, why can't she shift?" Declan asked. "I'm running a toxicology screen now," Dr. Aris said. She inserted the second vial. The machine worked for a longer time this time. The silence in the room was thick. Clara felt a strange dread pooling in her stomach. The machine let out a sharp, red alert ping. Dr. Aris gasped. She dropped the stylus she was holding. She looked from the screen to Clara, horror written all over her face. "What is it?" Declan growled, moving to the desk in a blur of speed. "Wolfsbane," Dr. Aris whispered. "But not just wolfsbane. It's a synthetic derivative. Argentbane. It's a suppressant used in federal prisons to keep rogue alphas from shifting." Clara stared at her. "What? I've never taken drugs in my life." "You wouldn't know," Dr. Aris said, her voice trembling with anger. "This isn't something you take once. To maintain these levels. Clara, you have been microdosed with this poison for years, likely since puberty." The room spun. Clara gripped the sheets. "Poisoned? By who? Who prepared your food?" Declan asked. His voice was terrifyingly calm, a low rumble that vibrated the floorboards. "Who gave you your vitamins? Who managed your health?" Clara's mind flashed back. Every morning since she was 13, her father had given her a protein shake for her weak constitution. He watched her drink it every single day. Beatrice used to watch too, smirking over her bowl of fruit. "She's defective, Daddy. Make sure she drinks her medicine so she doesn't get sick." "My father," Clara whispered, tears filling her eyes. "He gave me a supplement every morning. He said I was sickly." Roar. The sound didn't come from a human. It came from Declan. He threw his head back and let out a roar that shattered the heavy glass vase on the mantelpiece. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. He turned to the window, bracing his hands against the frame, breathing heavily. His claws had extended, gouging deep marks into the wood. "They stole your wolf," Declan snarled, his back to her. "They drugged you to make you a servant, to elevate Beatrice. They crippled you on purpose." Clara sat there, the betrayal hitting her harder than the realization of the poison. Her own father, her own sister. They hadn't just neglected her, they had actively suppressed her essence. They had kept her weak so they could use her. "Can it be reversed?" Declan asked, turning around. His eyes were fully gold now, the beast at the surface. "Yes," Dr. Aris said quickly, "but it will be painful. The withdrawal from Argentbane is brutal. Her body will try to shift immediately once the toxin clears. She's been suppressed for 10 years, Alpha. Her wolf is going to be volatile." Declan walked over to the bed. He knelt in front of Clara. The anger in his face vanished when he looked at her, replaced by a fierce protectiveness. He took her hands. "I'm going to kill him," Declan said. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, but not yet. "First, we heal you." "I'm scared," Clara admitted, her voice breaking. "You should be," Declan said. "It's going to hurt, but I will be right here. I won't leave this room. I'll anchor you." He looked at Dr. Aris. "Start the flush." "Now." Dr. Aris nodded and began preparing an IV drip of clear, glowing blue liquid. As the needle pierced her skin again, Clara looked at the blue fluid entering her veins. She realized this was the turning point. The invisible girl was dying, and something else, something that had been clawing at the walls of her soul for a decade, was about to wake up. Downstairs, in the servants' entrance, a maid named Sarah checked her phone. She had a text message from an unknown number. "Plan B is a go. Drop the package in the Alpha's private water supply. Tonight." Sarah looked around nervously, then slipped a small vial of clear liquid concentrated silver nitrate into her apron pocket. She headed toward the elevator that led to the penthouse suite. Clara was about to go through hell to find her wolf, but her family wasn't done trying to kill it. The detox process was not a medical procedure. It was an exorcism. For the first 6 hours, Clara simply sweated. The sheets of the king-sized bed were soaked through, and the air in the room grew heavy and humid, smelling of sickness and chemical runoff. "Doctor," Aris monitored the monitors with a grim expression, adjusting the flow of the blue flushing agent every 30 minutes. Declan did not move. He sat in a chair pulled right up to the bedside, his hand engulfing Clara's clammy one. He was the anchor. Every time she thrashed, whimpering about the fire in her veins, he would squeeze her hand and send a pulse of his own alpha calmness down the bond that was slowly forming between them. "It hurts," Clara gasped, her back arching off the mattress. Her eyes were squeezed shut, tears leaking from the corners. "Please, make it stop. It feels like there's glass in my blood." "I know," Declan murmured, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "It's the poison leaving. It's fighting to stay. You have to fight harder, Clara." "I can't," she sobbed. "I'm weak. Beatrice always said I was weak." "Beatrice is a liar," Declan growled, his voice low and vibrating against her skin. "You are surviving a dose of toxin that would have killed a lesser wolf in a year. You have survived it for a decade. You are the strongest thing in this house." Around midnight, the screaming started. The Argent Bane had bound itself to her bone marrow. As the antidote ripped it out, it felt like her bones were being scraped with knives. Clara screamed until her voice gave out, turning into a rasping sob. Declan's patience frayed. He turned to Dr. Aris, his eyes glowing a dangerous, unstable gold. "Give her something for the pain. She's suffering too much." "I can't," Dr. Aris said, though she looked pained herself. "Painkillers will slow the metabolic rate. If we slow it down, the toxin could settle back in. She has to burn it out, Alpha. She has to feel it." Declan cursed and turned back to Clara. He climbed onto the bed, ignoring the sweat and the fluids, and pulled her shivering body against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her damp hair. "Focus on me," he commanded softly. "Focus on my heartbeat. Listen to it. Thump, thump, thump." Clara, delirious with pain, pressed her ear to his chest. The sound of his heart was like a war drum. It was steady, powerful, and furious. It gave her something to hold on to in the dark ocean of pain. At 3 a.m., the fever broke. Clara went limp, her breathing shallow but steady. The tension in the room snapped. Dr. Aris let out a long sigh and slumped into her chair. "The worst is over," the doctor whispered. "Now, her body rests. When she wakes up, the shift will begin." Declan nodded. He was exhausted, his shirt clinging to his skin, but he didn't let go of Clara. A soft knock came at the door. Declan stiffened. His protective instincts were dialed up to 11. "Who is it?" "Housekeeping." "Alpha," a timid voice came through the wood. "I brought fresh linens and water. Silas insisted you stay hydrated." It was Sarah. "Leave it at the door," Declan commanded. "Silas said I must bring it in, sir. To check on the guest." Declan grunted. He carefully untangled himself from Clara and stood up. His muscles were stiff. He walked to the door and opened it. Sarah stood there, holding a tray with a crystal pitcher of water and fresh towels. She looked terrified, her eyes darting to the bed where Clara lay unconscious. "Put it on the table," Declan said, stepping aside. Sarah hurried in. Her hands were shaking so badly the ice in the pitcher clinked against the glass. She set the tray down on the coffee table near the window. Is she going to make it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "She will," Declan said, watching her closely. He noticed the sweat on Sarah's upper lip. It was cold in the hallway. Why was she sweating? "That's good," Sarah said. She poured a glass of water. "She'll be thirsty when she wakes up. Best to have it ready." She extended the glass toward Declan. Declan reached for it. But as his hand moved, the air currents in the room shifted. The scent of the water hit him. It smelled like water. But underneath the mineral scent, there was something else. Something sharp, acrid, like ozone during a thunderstorm or old coins. "Silver." Declan's hand stopped inches from the glass. He looked at Sarah. Her pupils were dilated. Her heart rate was skyrocketing. He could hear it hammering against her ribs like a trapped rabbit. "Who prepared this?" Declan asked softly. I did, Alpha, from the kitchen tap, just like always." "Drink it," Declan said. Zara froze. "Sir?" "Drink it," Declan repeated. His voice didn't rise, but the command slammed into the room with the weight of a sledgehammer. If it's just water, drink it. Sarah's face turned grey. She took a step back, the glass trembling in her hand. I'm not thirsty, Alpha. Drink it. Declan lunged. Sarah shrieked and threw the water at him. Declan moved with supernatural speed, dodging the splash, but a few drops hit the sleeve of his black t-shirt. Hiss. The fabric smoked and dissolved instantly, burning small, black holes into the cotton. If that had hit Clara's throat, it would have burned through her esophagus in seconds. Sarah turned to run, but she didn't make it 2 steps. Declan was on her. He didn't strike her. He wasn't a man who beat subordinates, but he grabbed her by the back of her uniform and slammed her against the wall, pinning her feet off the ground. Silver nitrate, Declan snarled, his face inches from hers. His canines extended, sharp and lethal. Concentrated. Who gave it to you? Please, Sarah sobbed, dangling against the wall. They have my brother. They said they'd kill him. Who? Evans, she screamed. Richard Evans. He said if she woke up, she'd destroy everything. He said she had to die before the wolf took hold. Declan dropped her. Sarah collapsed on the floor, weeping. Silas! Declan roared. The door burst open and Silas, the baiter, rushed in, gun drawn. He saw the smoking holes in Declan's shirt and the weeping maid. He holstered the weapon immediately, his face darkening. Get her out of here, Declan said, his voice ice cold. Lock her in the cells, find her brother, and secure him, get him away from the Evans family. Then, interrogate her. I want to know every single time Richard Evans has contacted my staff. Silas dragged the sobbing maid out of the room. Declan stood there, his chest heaving. He looked at the smoking burns on his shirt. They had tried to assassinate his mate inside his own bedroom. He turned back to Clara. She was still sleeping, peaceful and unaware that she had almost just swallowed liquid fire. Dr. Aris, Declan said, stripping off his ruined shirt. Clear the room. Lock the doors. No one comes in. No one goes out. Not until she shifts. And when she shifts, Dr. Aris asked, packing up her equipment nervously. Then we go to war, Declan said. The shift came at dawn, and it came with violence. Clara woke up gasping. It wasn't pain anymore. It was pressure. Immense, crushing pressure inside her own skin. It felt like her body was too small for what was trying to expand inside it. Declan, she cried out. Declan was there instantly. He had dragged the mattress off the bed frame and onto the floor, creating a safe, soft space. He knew the first shift could be clumsy and destructive. I'm here, he said, kneeling beside her. Let it happen, Clara. Don't fight it. Break. I can't. It feels like I'm dying. You aren't dying. You are being born. The sound of a bone snapping echoed through the room. Clara screamed, her back bowing. Her shoulder blade dislocated, reshaping itself. Then her ribs. It was a gruesome process to watch, but Declan watched with reverence. He saw the fur beginning to sprout along her spine. Shift with me, he whispered. Declan stepped back. He closed his eyes and let his own control slip. A ripple of darkness moved over his skin. His bones cracked and rearranged with the ease of practice. Within seconds, the man was gone. In his place stood a massive midnight wolf. He was huge, easily the size of a pony, with fur as black as a void and eyes of burning gold. He lowered his massive head and nudged Clara's trembling human hand with his wet nose. Let go, he projected into her mind. The telepathic link was weak, but it was there. Clara looked into the wolf's eyes. She saw safety. She saw power, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the invisible, broken girl. She felt angry. She felt powerful. She stopped fighting the pain and leaned into it. With a final, agonizing crack, her human form dissolved. A blinding flash of energy pulsed through the room, shattering the windows. The glass rained down onto the balcony outside, but neither wolf moved. When the dust settled, Declan the Midnight Wolf stepped back, a low whine of awe escaping his throat. Standing before him was not a normal wolf. She wasn't the small, brownish-grey wolf that most latents produced. She wasn't even the sleek russet color of the Evans bloodline. She was massive. She was nearly as tall as Declan, and she was pure, blinding white. Her fur was like fresh snow, thick and lustrous. But it was her eyes that stopped Declan's heart. They were not hazel anymore. They were a piercing, electric violet. A white wolf. The legends of the Pacific Coast Pack spoke of white wolves, but they hadn't been seen in 300 years. They were the lunar primes. They were the only wolves capable of balancing the immense, dark energy of an alpha king without being crushed by it. They possessed not just physical strength, but spiritual authority. Beatrice was a show pony. Clara was a goddess. Clara shook out her massive coat, sending a cloud of white fur into the air. She looked down at her paws, huge, white, tipped with razor-sharp claws. She felt the power thrumming through her muscles. She didn't feel sick. She didn't feel weak. She felt like she could run for days. She felt like she could tear a car in half. She looked at Declan. "You knew," she projected. Her mental voice was clear, bell-like. "I suspected," Declan replied, his voice deep and rough in her mind. "But this is magnificent." He bowed his head. It was a gesture of submission that an alpha king never performed. He lowered his neck to her. Clara approached him. She sniffed his neck, inhaling the scent of rain and cedar. Then she licked his muzzle. The bond snapped into place with the force of a thunderclap. It wasn't just a mating bond, it was a soul tie. They were two halves of a nuclear weapon. Suddenly, the door to the suite was pounded on. "Alpha," Silas's voice came through, frantic. "Alpha, we have a situation," Declan growled, the sound rumbling through the floor. He didn't want to shift back. He wanted to run into the woods with his mate. Clara nudged him. "Go, I'll follow." Declan shifted back, grabbing a pair of sweatpants from the floor. Clara concentrated, the magic of the shift reversing. It was smoother this time. She found herself naked, shivering slightly, but strong. Declan immediately threw a silk robe around her. He opened the door. Silas stood there, looking pale. "Sir, it's the Evans family. Did they attack?" Declan asked. "No, sir. Worse. They went to the press. And the council." Silas held up a tablet. On the screen was a live news broadcast. Richard Evans stood at a podium, looking like a grieving father. Beside him, Beatrice was weeping into a handkerchief. "My daughter, Clara, is mentally unstable," Richard was saying to the cameras. "She has been under our care for years due to severe delusions and latent sickness. Last night, Alpha Mercer, in a confused state, abducted her. We have medical records proving she is a danger to herself and others. We are demanding the High Council intervene. We want our daughter back before she hurts herself." "He's spinning the narrative," Declan said, his voice deadly calm. "He's claiming you're insane so he can get you back and drug you again." Clara stepped forward, tightening the robe around her waist. She looked at the screen, at the father who had poisoned her, and the sister who had mocked her. She looked at Declan. Her violet eyes were glowing, even in human form. "He says I'm unstable," Clara said, her voice finding a new, regal steeliness. "He says I'm a latent." "Yes," Silas said, looking at the floor. "The council has issued a summons. They want you to present Clara for an evaluation by noon today. If she is found to be a latent, by law, she must be returned to her family's custody." Declan laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "Let them come," Declan said. "Let the council come. Let the press come." He turned to Clara. "Are you ready to show them the truth?" Clara smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized she was at the top of the food chain. "I don't want to just show them," Clara said. "I want to break them." "Silas," Declan barked. "Prepare the motorcade. We are going to the council hall." "Now?" Silas asked. "Now," Clara answered for him. "My father wants a show? Let's give him one." The High Council Hall in downtown Seattle was less of a government building and more of a cathedral to old money and older blood. Built from granite and reinforced steel, it was the neutral ground where the 12 ruling families of the Pacific Northwest settled disputes that could not be resolved by clause alone. Today, the steps of the hall were a circus. Richard Evans had played his hand well. He had leaked the story to the human press as a celebrity mental health crisis, and to the shifter underground as alpha kidnapping. Dozens of reporters, both human and wolf, swarmed the barricades. "Mr. Evans, is it true your daughter is being held against her will?" a reporter shouted, thrusting a microphone over the railing. Richard, looking haggard and perfectly sympathetic in a dark suit, nodded gravely. He held Beatrice's hand. Beatrice wore a modest black dress, looking every inch the concerned sister. "Clara has always been fragile," Richard told the cameras, his voice breaking theatrically. She suffers from latency delusion syndrome. She believes she is a wolf, but her biology simply can't support it. We just want her home. We just want to get her the help she needs before Alpha Mercer's aggression causes her permanent damage. She's a danger to herself, Beatrice added, wiping a dry eye. We love her so much, we just want our sister back. The crowd murmured in sympathy. The narrative was set. The Evans family were the victims. Declan Mercer was the brute. Then, the Mercer motorcade arrived. It wasn't a diplomatic arrival. It was an invasion. 6 armored black SUVs screeched to a halt at the curb, flanking a custom Rolls-Royce Phantom. The security detail that poured out didn't look like bodyguards. They looked like special forces. Silas barked orders, pushing the press back with physical force. The back door of the Phantom opened. Declan stepped out first. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore tactical black pants and a fitted grey shirt that emphasized the sheer width of his shoulders. He looked like war. He turned and offered his hand to the interior. Clara emerged. The silence that swept the crowd was instantaneous. The fragile, sickly girl Richard had described was nowhere to be seen. Clara wore a white pantsuit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, sharp and modern. Her hair was slicked back in a high, severe ponytail, but it was her presence that stunned them. She stood tall, radiating a cold, serene power. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked straight at the doors of the council hall. "She doesn't look sick to me," a reporter whispered, the audio picked up by the boom mics. Clara took Declan's arm, and together they walked up the stairs. As they passed Richard and Beatrice, Clara stopped. Richard's sympathetic mask faltered. He looked at his daughter, and for the first time, he saw the predator behind her eyes. "Hello, Father," Clara said. Her voice was smooth, devoid of the stuttering fear she had lived with for years. "Clara!" Richard hissed, leaning in so the cameras wouldn't hear. "Don't make a scene. Come back quietly, and I won't have Dr. Aris arrested for malpractice." Clara smiled. It was the same terrifying smile she had given Declan earlier. "Dr. Aris is the least of your worries. You should be worrying about the dosage logs you left in your study." Richard's face went white. "Shall we?" Declan asked, steering Clara toward the great doors. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was suffocating. The 12 high elders sat on a raised dais, looking down at the circular floor. This was a tribunal. High Elder Grayson, a man as old as the redwood trees and just as unyielding, banged his gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "We are here to adjudicate the dispute between House Evans and House Mercer," Grayson announced, his voice rasping like dry leaves. "Richard Evans claims his daughter, Clara Evans, is a latent, suffering from mental instability and is being held unlawfully. Declan Mercer claims she is his mate and a functional wolf. The law is clear. A latent is a dependent of their birth pack. A wolf is a free agent." Grayson looked down at Clara, who stood in the center of the circle, alone. Declan had been forced to stand at the perimeter, growling low in his throat. "Clara Evans," Grayson said. "Step forward." Clara took a step. Her heels clicked on the marble. "Your father has provided medical records dating back 10 years, Grayson said, waving a thick file. "They state you have 0 lycanthropy markers, that you have never shifted, that you require daily medication to manage your human physiology. Is this true?" "The records are true," Clara said clearly, "but the context is a lie." "Explain," Grayson demanded. "I did not shift because I was poisoned," Clara said, her voice ringing through the hall. "For 10 years, my father administered a synthetic suppressant known as Argent Bane. He did not treat a sickness, Elder. He created one." A gasp went through the gallery. Richard Evans jumped to his feet. "Lies," Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger. "She is delusional. This is part of her sickness. She blames me for her own genetic failure." "Sit down, Evans," Elder Grayson snapped. He turned his cold gaze back to Clara. "That is a grave accusation, child. Argent Bane is a prison-grade narcotic. Do you have proof?" "I have my blood," Clara said, "and I have the wolf he tried to kill." Beatrice stood up then, unable to help herself. "What wolf?" she scoffed, her voice shrill. "You're a mouse, Clara. You've always been a mouse. Stop pretending you're one of us. It's embarrassing." "The council requires proof of the wolf," Grayson said. "If you are truly a wolf, you must shift. Here, now. Under the repression wards. The repression wards were the ultimate test. The council chamber was built on a foundation of dampening runes. To shift inside the circle required immense power. An Omega couldn't do it. A Beta struggled. Only an Alpha could force the change through the heavy magic of the room. If she cannot shift, Grayson continued, she will be remanded to the custody of Richard Evans for immediate psychiatric treatment. Declan gripped the railing of the gallery, the metal bending under his hands. He knew she had shifted once, but she was new. The wards were heavy. It was a trap. Do it, Richard sneered. Show them, Clara. Try to shift. You'll just break your bones. Clara looked at her father. Then she looked at Beatrice. She saw the smug satisfaction on their faces. They thought they had won. They thought the magic of the room would suppress her, just like the poison had. Clara closed her eyes. She didn't reach for anger. She didn't reach for fear. She reached for the truth. She reached for the white fire that had been burning in her marrow for a decade. Let them see, her wolf whispered. Clara inhalet. The air in the room began to vibrate. The water in the glasses on the elder's table rippled. High Elder Grayson leaned forward, his eyes widening. The dampening runes on the floor began to glow red, fighting against the energy rising from the girl in the white suit. Impossible, Beatrice whispered, the color draining from her face. Clara threw her head back. A sound tore from her throat, not a scream, but a melodic, harmonic resonance that shattered every light bulb in the chandelier above. Crack. The sound of the shift was louder this time. The white suit shredded. A blinding pillar of white light erupted in the center of the room, forcing the elders to shield their eyes. The pressure wave knocked Richard Evans back into his seat. When the light faded, the girl was gone. Standing in the center of the circle, dwarfing the podium, was the white wolf. She was magnificent. Her coat shimmered like diamond dust. Her violet eyes scanned the room, holding an intelligence and a ferocity that made the elders ancient. Powerful, alphas shrink back in their chairs. She let out a growl that wasn't just sound. It was authority. It commanded submission. One by one, the wolves in the gallery dropped to their knees. Even the elders felt the compulsion to bare their necks. This wasn't just a wolf. This was a biological royalty that hadn't been seen in centuries. Declan, standing at the edge, was the only one smiling. He looked at Richard Evans, who was currently cowering on the floor, staring up at the beast he had created. The white wolf turned her massive head toward Richard. She took one heavy step toward him, her claws clicking on the marble. She snarled, exposing teeth that could snap a man in half. "Well, Richard," Elder Grayson said, his voice trembling slightly as he stood up to bow to the white wolf. "It appears the custody hearing is over." She's a monster," Richard whimpered. "No," Grayson said, looking at the terrified Evans family. "She is a queen, and you are in very, very deep trouble." The judgment of the High Council was swift and merciless. Under the laws of the shifter territories, suppressing a wolf's nature, especially a wolf of prime lineage, was considered high treason against the species. Richard Evans didn't leave the hall in his luxury sedan. He left in iron shackles, dragged out by the very security team he had once paid off. His assets were seized, his pack standing dissolved. He would spend the rest of his life in the deep cells, a place where sunlight never touched the floor. Beatrice fared no better. Stripped of her title, her fortune, and her reputation, she was exiled. The socialite who had terrified servants for sport was forced to live as a rogue, wandering the borderlands with nothing but the clothes on her back, forever looking over her shoulder. 3 months later, the Mercer estate was transformed. Clara stood on the balcony of the master suite, the wind catching the heavy silk of her emerald gown. She wasn't the invisible girl anymore. As the Alpha Queen, she had reorganized the pack's welfare system, ensuring no latent child was ever overlooked or mistreated again. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind. Declan rested his chin on her shoulder, his presence warm and grounding. "They're waiting for you," he murmured, kissing the spot behind her ear where his mark now sat, a permanent claim of their bond. "Let them wait," Clara said, leaning back into him. "I spent 10 years rushing to please people. I think I can take a moment." Declan chuckled, the sound rumbling against her back. "You can take whatever you want, Clara. It's all yours." She turned in his arms, her violet eyes meeting his gold ones. The fear was gone. The poison was gone. All that remained was the queen who had survived the fire to claim her throne. "Ready?" Declan asked. Always, Clara replied. Together, they walked back inside to lead their kingdom. And that is the story of Clara Evans, the girl who went to a coronation as a servant and left as a queen. It's a brutal reminder that true power isn't about bloodlines or perfect appearances. It's about the strength to survive when the whole world wants to keep you down. Richard and Beatrice thought they could bury Clara's light, but they forgot that you can't bury a seed. You only help it grow. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We release new episodes every week. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.
Hi, my name is Mountain Confessions, the owner and manager of Mountain Confessions. After watching the video, she went to her sister's coronation, never knowing the Alpha King would choose her. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What I found most interesting about this story was the quiet feeling of being overlooked and then suddenly seen in a completely different light. Sometimes people walk into a room expecting to stand in someone else's shadow, only to realize they've had their own strength all along. The emotional shift between doubt and confidence made this story feel really personal in a subtle way. Do you think the Alpha King noticed something special in her before anyone else did? Or was it her honesty and character that changed everything? And if you were in her place, would you have believed someone could truly choose you when you least expected it? I think stories like this remind us not to measure our worth by how much attention we get compared to others. If this story stayed with you after the ending, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories like this, feel free to like or subscribe if you'd like to keep following more stories with Mountain Confessions.